Pour revenir donc à notre cri de guerre, si j'ose dire, puisque nous sommes véritablement en lutte. Et cette lutte, elle importe ici pour nous et pour eux là-bas, puisque chaque millimètre que nous perdons ici, ce sont des kilomètres qui sont perdus en Iran, en Algérie et ailleurs. Nous existons, nous sommes Légion, nous sommes l'alternative. Notre table ronde numéro 5, modérée par Mohamed Cherif Farjani, professeur honoraire de l'Université de Lyon, que j'appelle à monter sur scène, auteur notamment, parmi donc, les nombreux livres qu'il a écrits, un livre intitulé « La politique et le religieux dans le champ islamique » paru chez Fayard en 2005. Et là, j'ai envie de citer donc la phrase de Jean-Michel Ribes, on ne vous empêche pas de croire, vous ne nous empêcherez pas de penser. Bonne table ronde.
Je suis honoré de modérer ce panel qui est assez varié. Ça va de l'Australie au Maroc, à mon côté, en passant par d'autres pays, l'Arabie Saoudite, le Pakistan et le Kenya. Ce panel va donc dire nous existons à la suite du film qui a été projeté, du documentaire qui a été projeté. Nous existons, nous sommes Légion, c'est-à-dire qu'on soit nombreux ou qu'on ne soit pas nombreux, nous sommes connus, nous avons une histoire, nous avons un parcours et nous sommes l'alternative. Donc je voudrais donc ouvrir ce panel par une question à tout le monde. Comment, à travers votre existence, chacun de vous, vous incarnez une alternative? Qu'est-ce que vous faites pour ce que nous sommes, laïcs, vous représentez la laïcité dans vos sociétés, dans vos pays. Comment vous le faites? Ça, c'est ma première question. Alors, je commence, s'il vous plaît, de me pardonner, de présenter les panélistes. D'abord, nous avons la première, selon l'ordre, qui est annoncée, Rana Ahmed, qui est une militante ex-musulmane, donc syro-saoudienne. Après avoir tourné le dos à la religion, elle a dû fuir son pays parce qu'elle était menacée de mort par sa famille et par le gouvernement saoudien. Elle est blogueuse, rédactrice en chef de Pop Science et membre du Conseil des ex-musulmans en Allemagne. Donc, à toi, Rana, d'ouvrir le bal.
So yeah, maybe I will talk a little bit about Atheist Refugee Relief. The idea from this organization, it's come from me. When I come to Germany, I realized there is no organization helping ex-Muslim or atheists like other religion organization. Like, for example, in Germany, we have like Diakonie, Caritas, and a Muslim organization helping refugee, but a special organization helping ex-Muslim or atheist. And helping, I mean here like, being with a refugee, with all official thing that they do for the interview, for asylum, and like funding a school to learn language, or finding a place to stay, or even like social support. And yeah, from there, I think it was something important to have something like that in Germany, and not only in Germany, because I think we need more and more like this organization, not only with the help that we do. I also talking about the organization from Zara, as a psychologisches help. It's also needing for the refugee, because we know if you are leaving a Muslim country and you are ex-Muslim, you come with that trauma, you experience discrimination from your family, from your society, and when you come to safe country, your mind and your psychology need time to realize you are safe, and we need support also in this area.
Thank you. Taha Siddiqui est un journaliste pakistanais, prix Albert Londres en 2014. Il a dû fuir le Pakistan après avoir survécu à une tentative d'assassinat par l'armée pakistanaise. Il est le fondateur de Dissident Club, un bar socio-culturel au cœur de Paris. Il est l'auteur d'un roman graphique intitulé Dissident Club au Pakistan. En France, il continue d'écrire pour plusieurs publications internationales telles que le Washington Post, le Guardian, le magazine Foreign Policy. Il est également professeur à Sciences Po à Paris, où il enseigne le journalisme. Donc, il va nous dire, lui aussi, son parcours et comment il concrétise ce combat pour la laïcité.
So as explained, my profile's on the screen already, and I'm not going to talk about who I am, but more about the fact that, you know, I have another issue from Pakistan, the issues of freedom of expression. And I'm not as brave as many of these people here, because when I was in Pakistan, I was an atheist at that time, but I never publicly spoke about it because in Pakistan, you know, there's the blasphemy laws. And then with the blasphemy laws, there's the mob justice or injustice, where every few months or weeks we hear about someone who somehow blasphemed. I mean, sometimes it doesn't even make sense of the things that they're attacked for, and they're publicly lynched. But once I came here in France, I've had that sort of freedom to express myself, and in that I basically have been able to, you know, talk about my atheism. I recently wrote this book that was mentioned. It's over here. I just thought I should bring it. It's a comic book, actually. And again, this is something which, when I was growing up, and I mentioned this in the book also, I grew up in a very Islamist household in Saudi Arabia, so we have something common like that. And in Saudi Arabia, my parents were radicalized. They were from Pakistan, but they were living in Saudi Arabia, and they were radicalized there. And I explained how I went through that radicalization and eventually the journey of my emancipation and becoming an atheist and coming to Paris and having a bar. And I mean, again, coming back to the idea of freedom of expression, in Pakistan, where there are two things that you cannot talk about, religion and military. And I chose to talk about the military, not religion, because when you talk about the military, it's the state that you're challenging, which is different when you challenge non-state actors, because when you challenge religion, then you are faced with non-state actors who are anywhere and everywhere. They could be in your street, they could be your neighbor, they could be your office colleague. You know, in Pakistan, one of the most sort of brutal killings, I mean, killings are always brutal, but one of the most deadliest ones was a few years ago when Salman Taseer, who was the governor of Punjab, who was shot dead by his own police guards because he was defending a Christian woman who was on death row for blasphemy, and he was killed. I was standing there and watching this because we were editing this for the news bulletin, and we were like, this is too much of hate speech, we cannot let. And there was a guy standing next to me who was presenting the news, and he said, you know, Salman Taseer was too much. And I mean, he had just been killed brutally, and we were watching this insane person justify that murder. And I couldn't say to this person next to me that, how can you say that? Because I had to be quiet. So this is the life many of us live in Pakistan. But another thing that I would like to mention also is that now that I am in France, I believe that I do have my freedom of expression. But even here, freedom of expression is being limited in many ways. And yesterday, I was talking to some people from the organization, and they were telling me how some of the local organizers were afraid of, you know, talking about this conference happening publicly, which is the reality today, even in France, that we have this sort of fear. A few years ago, there was an attack outside Charlie Hebdo office by a Pakistani 26-year-old person who thought that the Charlie Hebdo office was still there. He attacked. We've seen, and it's not just with big names like Charlie Hebdo. Samuel Paty was someone, I had to talk to him. I have a 10-year-old child here in school, and I had to talk to him about it. And the kind of influence at times, it's a different thing, but at least here we can do it. But, one day my son came back from school and said that, why don't we do Ramadan? And I was like, why do you ask that? He's like, no, because my school friends were telling me you're from Pakistan, so you're Muslim, so you need to do Ramadan. So, we have to be very vigilant of this sort of influence and everywhere. And I just wanted to add that to the point.
Donc, on va continuer le tour de table avec Betty Lashgar, qui est marocaine. On l'a vu dans les documentaires hier et aujourd'hui, son rôle très important, aussi bien pour le pique-nique pendant le mois de Ramadan que pour les baisers contre la répression qui s'est abattue sur des jeunes qui se sont embrassés en public. Donc, elle aussi, je continue à la présenter. Elle est psychologue, clinicienne, spécialiste de criminologie et victimologie dans les luttes contre les violences sexistes et sexuelles. Elle fonde au Maroc en 2009 le mouvement alternatif pour les libertés individuelles. Vous avez la parole.
Alors, je vais essayer d'être brève parce que donc, je suis fondatrice du mouvement alternatif pour les libertés individuelles fondé en 2009. Et donc, ça fait déjà 15 ans, donc je ne peux pas résumer tout ce qu'on fait. Mais c'est un mouvement de désobéissance civile. C'est un mouvement féministe universaliste et laïque. Et nous organisons des campagnes et des actions pour dénoncer les atteintes aux libertés individuelles au sens large, aux droits des femmes en particulier. Mais en tout cas, quand je parle de liberté individuelle, ça va de la liberté de conscience, liberté de religion, liberté d'expression, etc. Mais il faut savoir que le Maroc est quand même une monarchie absolue de droits divins. Donc ça, c'est très important. Donc quand on parle de droits divins, on ne peut pas parler de droits humains. C'est incompatible. Le roi Mohamed VI est commandeur des croyants. Donc il est considéré descendant du prophète. Donc c'est un petit peu comme le pape, en fait, du Maroc. Donc c'est un peu... voilà. Et ce que les gens aussi ne savent pas, c'est que les lois, du coup, et les pratiques liberticides au Maroc, elles sont, pour beaucoup, inspirées de la charia islamique. Et donc, quand on a fondé ce mouvement, le mouvement Mali, donc c'était vraiment pour un appel à la laïcité, à la séparation du religieux du politique, à la séparation des institutions publiques et des organisations religieuses, parce que nous estimons que sans ce principe de laïcité, on ne peut pas accéder à nos droits et à nos libertés fondamentales. Pour nous, la laïcité, c'est vraiment le pilier de l'ensemble des libertés individuelles. Et donc nous avons mené une campagne où nous avons repris une grande majorité d'articles de ce code de la famille, très archaïques, très sexistes, moyenâgeux, et on les a modifiés. Donc on les a nous-mêmes réformés, parce que ça ne va jamais être fait, mais bon, c'est une campagne symbolique. Et notre message était très clair. Nous avons dénoncé et quelque part attaqué les propos du roi Mohamed VI, sachant qu'il y a un article de loi au Maroc où on ne peut pas attaquer la monarchie, ni la critiquer, et non plus l'islam. Et nous, dans notre campagne, finalement, c'était une attaque et à la monarchie, quelque part, vu que c'était les propos du roi Mohamed VI, et une attaque finalement aux religions, enfin, en tout cas à l'islam, par rapport à ces articles de loi archaïques. Bon, malheureusement, cette campagne a été complètement censurée par les médias, qui pourtant d'habitude, voilà, beaucoup de campagnes d'action sont très médiatisées, mais celle-ci en particulier, la plupart des médias nous ont dit nous ne pouvons pas en parler, nous ne pouvons pas diffuser vos revendications quant à cette campagne, parce que ça porte atteinte à la monarchie et à l'islam. Et donc voilà, malheureusement, il y a un grand débat actuellement. Une commission a été mise en place par le roi Mohamed VI, une commission de 3 hommes, souvent pour parler des droits des femmes. Voilà, ce sont les hommes qui vont nous libérer et nous émanciper du patriarcat. Et en fait, donc, il y a plusieurs organisations de la société civile qui prennent part à cette réforme. Mais voilà, la laïcité n'est pas du tout à l'ordre du jour, ni par rapport à cette réforme, ni par rapport aux autres luttes pour les libertés individuelles et les droits des femmes.
Merci. Donc, après le Pakistan, l'Arabie Saoudite, le Maroc, on va passer donc au Kenya avec Halima Salat, qui est journaliste, poétesse internationale, originaire donc du Kenya. Elle a quitté l'islam à la fin de sa vingtaine et a vécu une double vie en tant qu'ex-musulmane vivant au sein d'une communauté religieuse pendant 9 ans avant d'immigrer aux Pays-Bas où elle a pu assumer son apostasie. Halima est une créatrice orale, artiste du spoken word, qui lit sa poésie sur les scènes en anglais à Amsterdam. Donc, vous avez la parole pour nous dire un peu votre parcours de combat pour la laïcité.
I wrote that bio, by the way, in such a hurry. So forgive me, I am now Dutch. I've lived in the Netherlands for 8 years. My identity is so complex in itself as well. I'm ethnically Somali, but I've never lived in Somalia. Thanks, British colonialists, for drawing that line. So my part of the things that I also can relate to what Khaira was saying yesterday, and I'm going to go straight to that. It's a bunch of people do know who I am, and in terms of like the stuff that I have been through. I don't want to get into details with those. But when I was growing up in the early 90s, when I was in primary school, I went to a primary school in northeastern Kenya in a place called Garissa. It's really tiny. And in this area, initially our school uniform was like just a short sleeve blouse and skirt, and everything was normal, and religion wasn't that big a deal. And then I started seeing these metamorphoses of it entering into the school systems, because in Kenya's constitution and laws, Kenya is a multi-faith country. And so it is supposed to be secular in paper. But what happens in 2 provinces of the 8 provinces of the country is that the religious and the cleric people will go to the district administrations and say things like that. We want longer skirts. We want the girls to wear like long pants underneath their skirt. And I started noticing that while I was going through primary myself, where we started wearing this little triangular thing over my neck, and then it became over the shoulder, and then it now, if you Google today, right now actually, really, I challenge you to Google while you're sat here, Garissa Primary School, you will see the images that come is a sea of girls in clothing called jilbab all the way to the legs. Now that happens also in the coastal province of Kenya, and this is where areas where Al-Shabaab and terrorist organizations started, taking root and really establishing themselves as some sort of different, entity. And the Kenyan government on the overall, because, religion is also big, Christianity is big there. There's always almost an excuse to let it be, because it's their culture and their side, and as long as it's not interfering. And it did start interfering when Al-Shabaab started getting really active in Nairobi as well, the capital city, where where now then it started creating interreligious hatred for no reason, where my friends who had always been my friends would also look at me like, oh yeah, so you guys are from Al-Shabaab, isn't it? And I'm like, no, I'm an ex-Muslim though. The reason why I was in the closet, I guess, just explains why I was in the closet for 9 years. But also the number of people that I talk to online or offline about their experiences and I will get into that in the last question where we will handle that, is also the repercussions that are there here, even in safe countries, is Islam is a family affair. Islam is enforced by family members. Even when you're living in a laicite situation, these are going to always be enforced, depending on the religiosity and the fanaticism of that family unit. There's always going to be that repercussion. People face homelessness, people lose, and this is like, I'm talking like in the Netherlands or the UK or France or whatever, and people lose support to college funds if they were in college and they're young people. People get ostracized, and the emotional toil is something that it's really hard to explain to people who haven't been through it. When I moved to the West, it's like the way it happened, you can almost pinpoint when it started going that way everywhere in the world. And what caused in my little small village in Garissa, what I can pinpoint is seeing all these, new non-profit organizations from Saudi Arabia that are bringing aid, and they're bringing, they're building new madrasas, and the madrasa is the Islamic school, and they are pumping money, and they're solving a really pertinent issue for the people who are living in abject poverty, who have struggles with their own government. Because you have to understand, like if I explain the history of how the northeastern part of Kenya is also not exactly been developed by the rest of Kenya, we'll get into a whole geopolitical whatever, but I won't. So these people are already vulnerable position, and these guys come in with money and solutions, and you start to see that metamorphosis just go. And I don't know if I was the only one observing in my vicinity, because I felt alone. I'm like, can you guys not see what happened 5 years ago and what's now? So I hope that answers.
Après le Kenya, on va passer à la Tanzanie avec Zahra Kay, qui est une militante athée, donc ex-musulmane, vivant actuellement en Australie. Elle a fondé Faithless Hijab, une plateforme qui permet aux femmes ex-musulmanes de partager leur histoire et leur passage de la religion à la raison.
Hi everyone, I hope you've had your coffee because I'm very loud, so I'm going to wake you up. This description is a bit incorrect, and I didn't correct it because it was already printed, but I live in Sweden now. I'm an Australian citizen, but I was born in Tanzania, and without Tanzania being my defining story, I was arrested on dubious charges from my community, very similar to what Halima said. Despite being a secular country, it's very influenced by religious leaders as well. And for me, it was the Iranian Revolution, Maryam, Iranians. It was the Iranian Revolution that actually affected Tanzania as well. And I come from a Shia community. But I kind of wanted to talk about the work I do, which Rana highlighted as well. And that's a lot on providing psychological support to women, but also men who leave Islam as well. As we all know, the journey doesn't end after you leave, after you're in a safe country. It continues. You're in an environment that's very new, that you don't understand the culture. And, integration is a hot topic in Europe. We all talk about it, but a lot of people don't come up with constructive solutions. And I feel like psychological support is one of them. There are women who have come from all of these countries where they've been oppressed and discriminated, and they don't know that there's a world outside that they need to confront in their challenges beyond, living in Muslim majority countries. But, kind of going back to the question on like atheists at risk, I think all of us in our own organizations do a lot of work on supporting people who live in those countries, but also outside, and providing a community on it.
Thank you. Thank you. En français. Il faut que je parle en français. On me rappelle. Voilà. Moi, je vais poser quelques questions. Comme on dirait, grâce à Dieu, nous n'avons affaire qu'à des athées dans ce panel. Et des athées qui sont d'origine musulmane, qui ont tous donc quitté l'islam, ce qui correspond à l'apostasie dans les pays musulmans. Alors, nous existons et nous sommes l'alternative. Comment on peut être l'alternative dans les pays musulmans aujourd'hui, quand on est pour la laïcité? Comment gagner des musulmans à la cause de la laïcité? Je vais poser des questions un peu qui se rapprochent de la situation d'origine de chacun des pays. Il a été question de la charia qui est comme obstacle à la laïcité et à des législations séculières dans les pays musulmans, ce qui est vrai. J'étais au Maroc en 98, juste avant la mort de Hassan II, pour un colloque qui voulait appeler à l'actualisation de la charia. Le libre examen et l'actualisation de la charia. Le terme actualisation en arabe, il y a une seule lettre qui diffère avec neutralisation de la charia. Je lui dis, moi, je suis prêt à participer à votre colloque si vous changez une seule lettre. Remplacez le noun, tahyin, par le del pour dire neutralisation de la charia. Et c'était une journée très intense à l'époque. C'était la première réforme de la Moudawana. Et il y avait des gens donc qui parlaient, par exemple, de la laïcité. J'ai animé une conférence sur la laïcité au Maroc et avec Ahmed Harzani, et qui lui aussi était pour la laïcité. Quelqu'un de la salle nous dit: que devient la fonction de commandeur de croyants dans votre laïcité? Et moi, j'ai donné l'exemple de la reine d'Angleterre, qui est en même temps chef de l'église anglicane, mais les lois en Angleterre sont des lois civiles, votées par le Parlement. Et Ahmed Harzani il a dit, moi je vous ai utilisé une métaphore de la technologie actuelle. Il y a des fonctions qui existent dans un ordinateur, on les désactive. On désactive la fonction du commandeur des croyants et on continue à fonctionner avec nos ordinateurs. Donc c'était donc l'image. Là, en Arabie Saoudite, on nous vend l'image de Mohammed bin Salman. Effectivement, si vous comparez ce que dit Mohammed bin Salman à ce qui était interdit en Arabie Saoudite auparavant, Mohammed bin Salman, s'il avait dit cela avant de prendre le pouvoir en Arabie Saoudite, il aurait été zigouillé. Tout ce qui était condamné en Arabie Saoudite auparavant, Mohammed bin Salman se permet de le dire parce qu'il a le pouvoir. Et l'interprétation de la charia, c'est le pouvoir qu'il a fait.
For the changing in Saudi Arabia, I want to say something. Atheism or criticize a religion or talking about anything of religion, it was really forbidden. But when Mohammed bin Salman come in the government, he say if Saudi Arabia want to change and be more like having money, doing a business with other country, so we need to change the society and we need to be more open for the world. but still I am not a fan from Mohammed bin Salman. He put a lot of women rights activists in the jail until now. So he doing something good from other way, but he also until now like doing putting some women rights activists in the jail. And now in Saudi Arabia, if you see social media and how the people talking about Islam or atheism in social media, I am shocked. When I was in Saudi Arabia in 2011, 12, it was like no one writing about atheism or talking about that. Now you are hearing they talking with a voice. They are like discuss that in social media, open, clear, but with like hiding their identity. But it's like more like growing and more like opening, not like before. And it's because Mohammed bin Salman, because Mohammed bin Salman, he said, yeah, we need to change, so you are allowed to do that. But when the government say, no, we are not allowed to do that, so it's not the decision from the people, it's the decision from the government.
I mean, you're probably directly connected to Saudi Arabia, but Pakistan is a victim of that Saudi Wahhabi policy that you were mentioning, that started in the 70s, 80s after the oil boom, basically. That's what the money became. And even today, Pakistan has these madrasas, like you were mentioning, where children are radicalized, and the Saudi money. Then there's also the Qatari money. It's Saudi, Qatari from UAE. And I mean, just to add to the whole idea of MBS, it's basically a kind of a modern dictatorship where he says what are human rights, not what are universal rights. And that's one thing that, you know, I wanted to talk about Pakistan, for example, is that every time we talk about secularism or we talk about laicite, they say this is a Western idea. And the other day I was also discussing it with someone from France, and they were also saying, yes, you know, these Western values. And I think we have to correct this term that these are not Western values. These are international, universal human rights values. And I think we need to remind that to people, because this is what happens with us when we are talking about secularism in Pakistan, or when we're talking about freedom of expression in Pakistan. They box us and they say, oh, you're too westernized. And this is what I explain in the book also about this concept that we're not westernized. And you know, in the West, if you look at 300 years ago, 400 years ago, with the colonial history, with all the problems, there were the problems that there were, like the so-called dark ages or whatever. You know, the human rights, the ideas of human rights did not exist here, and other parts of the world, maybe in the parts where we're from, they existed. So this is an you know, a thing that has existed throughout the region, and we have to find that in Pakistan, for example. I always tell this to people that Pakistan has existed only for 75 years. My ancestors have lived there forever, and I am older than Pakistan, and Pakistan wants to impose its sort of you know, values or its sort of Islamic republic on us, on the people there. But we have a lot more diversified and rich culture. We have the Indus civilization. We have one of the oldest civilizations in the world, and they were quite advanced. There was no issue of religion, and we need to remember that these are all universal values that we need to talk about.
I just want to add a really quick one on the whole universality of the, you know, these values that we are all discussing here, that we've always been fighting for. How do you explain the way these values were in me while I was growing up in a small village? If that's Western, that's before I came to the West, you know, when I was rebelling against so many things. And this is just like giving myself as an example. And I know loads of people who have these values in them. And sometimes you have to tap into the indigenous knowledge. I heard about this, you know, it's still not like proven or whatever. There's so many myths even within the Somali community, because Somali community stuff is also very oral, where they talk about the societies that existed pre-Islam, before the you know, the Arabs showed up at the shores of East Africa, right? And they talk about this woman, this matriarchal woman called Arawelo, who was extremely very feminist, really like militant feminist. Like she used to kick out the men from the entire village. And this, this knowledge did exist, and these communities pre-Islam were people who are likes, I guess, to some extent.
Et puis je finirai juste par rapport à quelque chose, parce que il a été question tout à l'heure par plusieurs d'entre vous sur le fait qu'on soit accusé, entre guillemets, d'être occidentalisé. Eh ben, oui, on est accusé d'être occidentalisé parce que ce sont des valeurs occidentales, etc., dans ces pays, entre guillemets, dits musulmans, donc dans nos pays respectifs d'origine, mais c'est quelque chose qu'on entend également en Europe, ou en Occident, donc entre guillemets. C'est une accusation très fréquente quand nous prenons les valeurs qui sont donc universelles et la laïcité, etc. On est quand même attaqué aussi ici, et on est même censuré, parce qu'on parle de censure dans nos pays, etc. Mais même en Europe, quand nous partageons les idées qu'on a, et voilà, nous avons les mêmes valeurs et les mêmes idées, les mêmes combats, et ben nous sommes rarement, par exemple, invités à prendre la parole dans les médias ou dans des conférences.
C'était très important de préciser cette histoire d'accusation d'occidentaliser.
Voilà.
Et c'est très important de dire que ce discours-là, on le trouve même ici en France et en Europe. Et on va jusqu'à dire, au lieu de prôner des valeurs universelles, la Déclaration universelle des droits humains, on parle de valeurs occidentales, la démocratie occidentale, la laïcité occidentale, les valeurs occidentales. Et ça, alors qu'il faut les défendre, comme des valeurs universelles. Et Halima a dit que comment, dans ces villages, en Tanzanie, des gens, ils partagent ces valeurs sans aucune référence. Et partout, on se bat pour précisément la constitutionnalisation de la référence aux normes internationales, aux conventions internationales concernant le droit humain. Et je crois que c'est ça qui doit être l'axe de l'alternative.
I mean, I don't want to go down the road of we're being accused of this, but we want to make clear that these values, these fighting for the rights of women, fighting for the rights of LGBT, these individual liberties that we want, are not Western created. Please get it in your head. There are so many free thinkers in the world before us also, before us also. Meaning that guys who were older than us who thought that it was important for people to have individual human rights, and it's just civil, just civil. And so please, it's very important that we, while we can't, it's not like a fight, it's mine, it's yours, but it's also important to really, that we ourselves also give these examples and communicate that these values are shared. So can we just for one, have this conversation, especially within the left, and I'm firmly on the left. I really have to emphasize, I'm firmly on the left. And then when that space is created, what we will do is we will take it away from the right wing nut jobs, and we will have these conversations within ourselves and find that common goal. And that common goal already exists. Thank you.
I wanted to add for what Betty was saying about being accused of Islamophobia at times, but I think as us, we are all ex-Muslims, or so we are victims of Islam. So how can we be Islamophobic because we went through the whole attack of Islam? So I think And I also think that, there's this issue of, as you're saying, for the media not inviting you because they're saying that. And I think that's the problem with the leftist media at times. But at the same time, then there's the other danger, which is that you get, because of your speech or your discourse, you get used by the far right media. And we have to be very careful of that too. To make sure that we distinctly debate and discuss these things in the left and the progressive way, because it's very easy to fall into that trap where you are, playing the role of fanning that far right extremism, and we should not do that. So I just wanted to add that point to Betty's point.
On va passer la parole à la salle.
Plusieurs d'entre vous avaient signalé le fait qu'on n'est pas crédible et accusé d'être occidentaux. Bien, je voudrais vous signaler qu'il y a eu une étude au début des années 2000 en France. C'est un des laboratoires du CNRS, c'est-à-dire c'est pas un travail journalistique, c'est un travail de recherche extrêmement sérieux sur les croyances des Français. Et ils ont pris des échantillons parmi les supposés musulmans, à cause de leur nom, de leur origine, etc., et les supposés chrétiens, pour la même raison. Alors, les résultats de l'enquête, c'est que 25% de chaque catégorie à parité se déclarent athées. Ce qui veut dire que 25% des supposés musulmans en France se déclarent athées. Pour la petite histoire, il y a seulement 5% de gens qui se déclarent croyants et pratiquants. Et tout le reste, c'est des gens qui vont fêter Noël et fêter l'Aïd, et c'est tout. Et qui ne se déclarent pas athées, mais qui ne sont pas pratiquants. Donc c'est vraiment important de savoir qu'on a ces ressources à notre disposition et de les faire circuler. Je pense que nous manquons vraiment d'écrire notre propre histoire, l'histoire des laïcs et des athées dans nos pays.
My question is to the all panelists. We have seen that people who are extremists and radicals in the movies that, like yesterday and today, they are very vehemently, stressing and asserting that they don't want any other form of government except Sharia compliant. They don't believe in democracy. But the reality is that these people are not in large numbers in the Western countries. In large numbers, there are people who have manipulated, the Western setup and the government, the form of government we have here. They use democracy to seek privileges in the Western society. They use secularism to assert the supremacy of their beliefs, and they use the language of feminism to justify the misogynistic rituals and belief of their religion. So how can we just handle this situation? But because now they are no more on the side of radicals and Islamists. Many of them, they pretend to be moderators or the progressive and even secularist. But still, at the core of, at the heart of their discussion, the religion is the main factor, and they want to make everything compliant to their own beliefs. Thank you.
I think there are enough voices from our side also which are exposing them, and we are continuously talking about them. And I think what we were talking about earlier was that how we need to sort of engage with the leftist media, with the leftist organizations, and explain them this, because it was, we've sort of had these accusations of Islamophobia, then there's Islamogauchism and all of these things. I think we need to talk about people's stories, and and we need to remember the context that the people like us who are coming from Muslim majority countries and how we were victimized, and we need to remind those stories and give our testimonies and explain this to the people. And I think this is one way of reaching out and explaining, but at the same time not falling into the sort of the trap of the far right, or also, I think in these communities we have the opportunity to speak up. I mean, this conference is an example. This conference would never happen in Pakistan, for example, or in any of the countries that we're from. So this is sort of the way we're trying to raise awareness, and I think thanks to Nadia for making this happen.
Why should we define ourselves as an ex-Muslim? Really important question. Sorry, I was buzzing off a bit. Personally, I think it's important for the people who are unsure if they can say it, or who are in the process of shaking off religion, because you have to understand, leaving religion doesn't happen overnight. It's a process. Personally, I left Muhammad first before I left Islam. So in a sense, it's very important to actually say ex-Muslim, meaning I was born, my parents were like that, but I personally, individually, I left that apart. I am no longer part of that. It doesn't mean I left a community. It just means I am no longer subscribing to Islam. So it's important.
Thank you.
Excusez-moi, il y a juste une chose que je voulais signaler, c'est que il y avait un terme très important, à mon avis, dans ce panel, c'était « nous sommes l'alternative ».
Oui, oui.
Parce que, attends, 2 secondes, nous sommes l'alternative, c'est-à-dire que de tous vos cas personnels, et vous n'êtes que 5 sur cette scène, mais combien nombreux dans cette salle, nous pouvons, à notre échelle, convaincre les uns et les autres que nous sommes l'alternative. Donc par nos modes de vie, par notre expression, c'est-à-dire que, bien sûr, nous vivons en Europe, parce que nous avons fui des pays qui ne nous laissaient pas nous exprimer. Certains font des allers-retours. Mais c'est pas plus facile ici. Et je voudrais juste ajouter quelque chose, c'est qu'en France, ça n'est pas comme en Angleterre. Il n'y a pas des lois qui protègent le communautarisme. Et je ne pense pas que la majorité des musulmans, dits musulmans en France, soient des gens qui sont, intolérants envers la laïcité. Bien au contraire.
Bien. Et moi, je conclus en disant qu'il y a un grand universitaire français d'origine algérienne, Jamel Eddin Benchir, qui disait qu'il était athée musulman.
Merci beaucoup.